Okay, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure being here. I want to thank Trisha for being so persistent, and I want to thank Sophia for recommending me as a speaker in the first place, because I really applaud your efforts to engage more people for environmentalism. When I heard the question this morning for your breakout room, I thought, is this really an either or question? For me, it's kind of a both and. And I will talk about that a little bit. That has everything to do with what I'm doing right now on Bees for Peace, is trying to create this sense of both and through my my project of trying to get religious communities on board to protect bees, butterflies, and other pollinators, right? For those of you who are Catholic, if you have not yet read the papal encyclical Laudato Si from Pope Francis, 2015, this is also his point when he talks about integral ecology, that humans are a part of the web of life, not above it, not below it, not to the side of it, but part of that whole web of life. All right, let me see if I can share my screen here. This is, and I will just hop into my talk. Okay, everybody can see that okay? Good, all right. So, seeking, creating, and preserving common ground, reconciling religion and environmentalism. This is my theme for today. And here we have the lovely Sophia, who recommended me as your speaker for today. Bees for Peace, we had an award ceremony in August of 2020. Once the pandemic had started, we held it outside. But in order to promote protective measures against COVID-19, I had masks made. And we played a game of Trivial Pursuit, the Bee edition. And people who got the right answer received a Bees for Peace mask as a prize. Sophia was already back home, so I sent her one in the mail. Okay, but Trisha had asked two questions. She wanted me to talk about two questions today. What is religious environmentalism? And what can faith contribute to our work in environmental conservation? So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to answer those two questions today. So you all are in environmentalism, as I understand it. So what I have to say on this particular slide, you already know. There is an accelerating anthropogenic climate change that is threatening us and many other species with extinction. There's a full-scale plundering of the Earth's resources that's going on here in Canada, in Germany, where that particular picture is from, and elsewhere in the world, all around the world. And then we have this tremendous loss of biological diversity. Several scholars and religious thinkers, scientists, people across the spectrum have said, at heart, this represents a moral crisis, right? It's not just a technological crisis, it's not just an economic crisis, but it's a moral crisis. So maybe religions can help as entities that are centrally involved with morality. It's important to realize that most of the people of the world affiliate with one or another religion. And so in my work in Germany, I found a lot of nature conservationists were very skeptical about working with people of faith. But even in Germany, even in a secular Western state like Germany, most of the population still identify with one or another religion. How much they practice it, that's another issue, but they still affiliate with it, okay? And you see, just in terms of Christianity, 2 billion people. You add Islam to that, we're talking well over 3.5 billion people on the planet, okay? So yes, we have a lot of people who are non-religious or agnostic or atheist, but you add up all the people who are religious, and I had to take a few categories off because it's so long. There's a lot of people who could be mobilized for environmentalism if you speak their language. The fact is that religions have a lot of resources that could be used for environmental purposes. They have spiritual and psychological resources, mainly values such as love and peace and generosity and gratitude and sharing and so on, that can be, and I have seen, used in service to the planet. They also have coping mechanisms, coping strategies, and other techniques that build our resilience, which I think is really necessary as we face these global crises together. They have a lot of community-oriented resources, social networks, organizational networks. These networks often cross national boundaries, right? They bring families together. So you have the potential of a tremendous multiplier effect if you can activate a house of worship for environmentalism. They have educational programs. I just think, for example, in the Christian church, which I'm most familiar with, Sunday school. While the parents are listening to the service, right, the kids are off in Sunday school. Great opportunity for them to do environmentalist projects. And religious communities around the world engage in social work, right, charity. They help others. This is a main factor of what they do. And then, as you see from the slide here, they have material resources. They have buildings and grounds. You know, this is a Christian church in Germany that makes its faith, its eco-faith, public, right? By saying, yes, we're going to care for creation by using renewable energy, right? But they have grounds that can be turned into oases for local plants and animals. They have media outlets, and they have personnel who can do this work, okay? One thing I didn't put on the slide is the financial resources. There is a huge divestment movement going on to get municipalities and universities and religious organizations to stop investing in coal and oil. It is having an effect. So there's a lot of talk about what religions could do, right? They could cause an inner transformation of the intellect and the heart by bringing those together, right? They could promote a connection that is both emotional and scientific and apply that to the preservation of nature. They could steer humanity toward redemption and rejuvenation. That's actually the perspective of the United Nations Environment Program. The question is, of course, do they do that? And that is more of an academic debate, right? What do empirical studies say? So in terms of what religious environmentalism is it just the intersection between religion and environmentalism, or is it more this claim that religions are inherently environmental, right? That respecting and preserving the integrity of nature is an essential message of all religions. Now you see a list of names there. These are scholars who want to challenge that claim. My particular interest is not about what the truth once was and what it is now, but how do religious actors today understand their faiths? And what I find is that this intersection between religion and environmentalism to be incredibly creative. You know, the fact is that as long as religion is a living tradition, have people practicing it, it's constantly going through changes. It's constantly being transformed because people, as they live their lives, they bring their current questions to their faiths and then read their scriptures or try to understand their traditions in ways that make sense for the world that they live in now. Okay, so whether for good or for ill, religious actors are constantly reevaluating, reinterpreting, reforming, reconstructing their religious traditions. They extend non-environmentalist principles to environmentalism. They expand certain ideas to include the preservation of nature. They extract principles that they think are common to all religions. Bees for Peace does this, right? By saying peace is a concern of all religions, right? And we see bees as the messengers of peace that can connect different houses of worship. So we extract this principle of peace and extend it to the bio community. And then, of course, there's the invention of new traditions, right? As we think about what does God say? What does God want from us in terms of how we interact with the planet? New inventions are created. So just a couple of examples. In Islam, you have the term jihad, which has the basic meaning of striving or struggling. This is a very scary term for a lot of Westerners because they see it as meaning only this, religiously motivated terrorism as a war against infidels. But it also means, very simply, the struggle that any human, any person of faith, in any faith tradition goes through to conform their human will to that of the divine will, okay? These days, you have a lot of Muslim environmentalists who talk about eco-jihad, in which they mean to strive or to struggle to restore the balance of the earth that Allah had originally created it in, okay? In Christianity, and also in Judaism, you have in the beginning of the Bible two different creation accounts. One, creation of the cosmos in 6 days, with God resting on the 7th day, and the second one being the story of the Garden of Eden, okay? In the first story, when God created humanity, he told them to be fruitful and to increase in number and to fill the earth and subdue it and to rule over it. This has often been used to justify enormous exploitation of natural resources and of the humans who live in different parts of the world, right? In the second story, though, God puts Adam, his new being, in the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it, to tend it, to care for it, right? And so a lot of eco-Christians say, wait a minute, let's look again at the first Genesis story and see how God blessed what God created. This is a gift. This is not something we should be destroying. We are supposed to be tending it and taking care of it, right? So this is a new interpretation. Okay, but here's one of the problems that I've been facing in my own project of Bees for Peace, right? We have these two bees right here. One is a bee that more people are familiar with. It's the Western, in my part of the world. Let me keep in mind, I'm in a very different part of the world. But this is the Western honeybee. A lot of people are familiar with the Western honeybee. In fact, all around the world, there are religious traditions related to bees, but they're honeybees. There's different honeybees. There's the African, the Asian, the Western honeybee. And all of the religious traditions that I am familiar with so far relate to the honeybee. The other bee that you see is actually Toronto's official bee. And a lot of Torontons, they don't even know that. This is not a honeybee. This is called a green sweat bee. You see the green color. Their bees come in all sorts of colors. They are black, they're blue, they're green, they're brown. And they're often not recognizable because people are familiar with the honeybee, right? So in the past 100 years, we've had a very small group of people, maybe people like you, who have been focusing more on the bee on the right rather than the bee on the left. Because those people are ecologists, and those people have been studying how these native bees, these wild bees, these non-honey producing bees, how important, how absolutely essential they are to preserving ecosystems and, in fact, keeping our food security This is why I had to raise the question of, is this an either or question, right? If we don't preserve these bees, we will lose our food security. So in order to preserve our own food security, we have to preserve the food security of the bees, right? We have to identify with the bees. But how to do that? Most people don't even know these bees exist. So how do you get anybody, forget whether they're religious or non-religious, how do you get anybody today to think more like ecologists? Part of the problem, and this is one of the things that you all as environmentalists really need to be aware of, is that to most people outside of these smaller circles of trained environmentalists, they just don't get it. What exactly is climate change? How does it work? With greenhouse gases? What's that? Biological diversity? Huh? These are all terms that are scientific jargon. This is not everyday language. This is not, I don't walk down the street thinking about biological diversity, right? So you have to do some kind of worldview translation to get people to understand what these terms mean for their everyday lives, okay? I'm not going to go over the rest of this. I think that is one of the most important things that I want to stress. In my work in Cologne, this is exactly what we were trying to do. I was part of a federally funded project called Religions for Biological Diversity. And I said again and again, your title is terrible because of this term biological diversity. Still, we had a couple of years in a row in Cologne an interreligious week for nature conservation. And people, it's amazing how creative religious people are when they apply their religious perspectives to the issue of environmentalism. So here at a Buddhist center, it was the Year of the Earth Dog, and they created 4 new rituals, one for each season and for each of the elements, earth, fire, water, and air. And they did a meditation practice. Where do I find this element in the world? Where do I find it in my own body? To create this sense of interdependence, right? With not the environment, but the world that we are a part of. And then in the spring, they went out and they planted flowers in the planter boxes that they had built to feed bees. And they built bee hotels as well. And they created a whole family day out of this. In the central mosque for a Turkish Muslim association, you see here they don't have a lot of green space. What they have kind of to the side of this big dome is a staircase that leads up to a big plaza. And what they did during Friday prayers one day is they had the imams in all of their mosque communities, which is over 900, preach on how nature conservation is an inherent part of Islam. And then at the central mosque, people went outdoors, gave money for flowers, and then planted them in flower boxes all over the central plaza. And they specifically chose flowers that would support local bees, okay? You also have a great multiplier effect. This was our first action for Bees for Peace, where we had people from Baha'i, from Buddhism, from Catholicism, from Protestantism, who all came together to build raised beds for their respective religious communities and got to know each other, right? In this safe environment, right? Where they were literally focusing on the common ground. You know, a lot of interreligious projects get started because of some conflict, right? And so there's already this kind of mistrust, the suspicion, right? Okay, we have to find the common ground. If you go with environmentalism, common ground is already clear, right? We all need bees. And so they came together, right, and built these raised beds. But then the 2 women you see to the right, they're both school teachers. And they took the idea of bee protection into their lesson plans. One of the nature conservationists who was helping out, he went to a seniors home where you see the woman in the middle and built a raised bed for these seniors, right? And then this all took place in a Catholic youth center that had this great woodworking center. To the left, you see it says theme of the week, the flying bees, because the social workers in this youth center understood that their kids didn't know anything about bees. So they did a whole bee week, and they did all sorts of things. Watch bee movies, they planted flowers, they got kids, kids like using power tools, so they got kids making bee hotels. They did all sorts of stuff. So it had this really great multiplier effect. And then these are just some of the things that were said afterwards regarding the Interreligious Week for Nature Conservation and Bees for Peace, right? Is that what I saw these collaborators doing is extending their religious values, these values that were created in a human community, and extending them to the bio community. Okay, so you have a Catholic adult educator who says, so it's about caring for the common home, a common house, because of God's concern for the common house. This is the influence of Laudato Si on him. A Baha'i member who said, I have an ethical responsibility in this day and age to protect and preserve nature. The Baha'i writings support and inspire me in this view. That Catholic adult educator, regarding Bees for Peace specifically, he said, I find the idea of bees as ambassadors of peace, who overcome all the walls and do great benefit to all with their tireless work, an important thought. And a Buddhist Center director, she said, bees don't discriminate. It doesn't matter what religion you are or what country you're from. Everybody needs bees, right? So right there, the common ground didn't need a lot of discussion. People could just see it and go for it. And then through that, they could get to know each other. So what I would then conclude with is that I find that that bringing faith matters, bringing religion into connection with environmentalism humanizes nature and brings it into the human community. One of the comments from the breakout rooms was that humans are basically self-centered and will do anything to survive. Well, I think bees are probably self-centered as well. I think most creatures are self-centered, right? They all want to survive. And so as creatures, of course, we also want to survive. And one of our main fears is dying as mortal beings, right? So how do we move ourselves past a more limited form of anthropocentrism to an expanded form of anthropocentrism? And I find that when religious actors get involved with environmentalism, they start talking about gratitude for creation and wanting to be generous toward other species, right? And loving the planet. And so what they do is they take these traditional religious values and extend them to the whole world, creating this sense of integral ecology, where everything is connected and everything belongs to our community. It's not separate anymore, right? One catch, though, is that you have to bring them the scientific knowledge and the practical know-how, because people of faith, they're like all the average people out on the street, out in the world. They don't know how to create a bee hotel that is biologically sound for bees, right? They don't understand the climate science and what it means if you waste water or run the heating too long, right? So there has to be this connection between the people of faith and the environmentalists, with an attempt on both sides, I think, but especially on the part of the environmentalists, to convey this knowledge to them while also respecting the articles of faith that people have. Because if you do that, you will find that people of faith will be incredibly creative and dedicated to this new world that they're creating. Thank you.